How's it going, guys? Today I want to talk about some of the surprising differences between Philippines and American culture. Let's go.
Subscribe now.
So I'm curious, how many of you guys have lived in a different culture? If you have, let me know where in the comments below. But one of the most interesting things about living in another country is to see the kinds of things that are different that you didn't quite expect. And definitely there was no shortage of things that failed to just really kind of shock or surprise me living here in the Philippines. And I want to talk about just a few of those in this video. So one of the things that's just so different between American and Philippines culture really has to do with the difference between independence and dependence. Now, I'm not talking about 4th of July kind of independence. I'm just talking about with people within themselves and how people interact as families and how the society really seems to function. I feel that in the US, it's a very independent society. From a really young age, I think that parents see their responsibility as helping their young kids to one day leave their home, preferably as early as possible in most families, and be independent, productive, responsible adults. And for Americans, and I think people in a lot of Western cultures, that's just seen as like normal. Like, of course, if you're a parent, you want to raise your kid to be independent and to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, pay their own bills, live in their own place, have their own family, yada, yada, yada. In the Philippines, though, I find that that really isn't the case. In the Philippines, instead of being a very independent society, it tends to be a far more dependent society. Now, that is just night and day difference. Independent versus dependent. I feel that here, families are really thinking much more different. They're, instead of thinking, I want my kid to grow up, leave the house, do their own thing, they're really thinking, how can I create a family where everybody helps each other out, where everybody depends on each other, where everybody makes sure that everybody always has a place to live and enough food and work, or whatever the things are that is needed within the family. In other words, people are raising people to be part of a whole, not this single member of society, but a dependent part of a whole family that looks out for each other and takes care of each other. And I think that sometimes when I'm here in the Philippines talking to Filipinos, they really have that number 18 in their mind and will say, like, you know, in the US, people are really expecting by the time you're 18 years old, you're going to be kicked out of the house. And there is some truth to that. You know, I think in American families, they really are raising their kids to just get out of the house and, of course, be responsible and all of those other things that we esteem and want to really raise our kids to be. But I think especially in the US, as things are getting more expensive, kids are living at home a lot later than they used to, or they're even coming back to home in their 30s, maybe even their 40s. So things are changing in the US culture as well. But for me, there's 2 different ways of looking at life, 2 different ways of looking at how you're going to raise your kids, 2 different ways of looking at what kind of member of a family and society will be. The US, the Philippines, radically different, but both, I think, have strengths and weaknesses to each part of the culture. The second thing that I was a little bit surprised to see here, okay, not a little bit, sometimes a lot surprised to see here in the Philippines, is how many people might live in a home. And I think part of this is really connected to that dependent part of things, where people aren't expected to leave to the home. People are expected to just be part of a whole family. And so sometimes there's, you know, more than one family, kind of related, extended families like cousins or aunts, uncles, different people that might be in the same house. And it means in some families, a lot of people are living in a pretty small place. That's not seen as a burden. It's not seen as negative. It's just part of the culture here that more people in some families, not all, but sometimes a lot of people might live in a home, compared to in the US. Mostly if like in-laws come or people from extended family, maybe they're welcome, maybe they're not so welcome, but the idea is always like we got family coming and then the family's gonna go. So here I really find that family members are so much more welcoming and open to, you know, close family and extended family coming and living in one house. Everybody's going to support each other. It's going to be a positive thing. In the US, going back to that independent culture, family's going to maybe come, but maybe even if they're visiting from out of town, they're just going to stay in a hotel. So this whole thing of how many people live in a home and who lives with you is really amazingly different between both cultures. Another thing that surprised me living in the Philippines was how different gender roles are in the US compared to here in the Philippines. Living in the Philippines feels like I kind of went back in time to a time that maybe never existed in the US, but probably did. You know, I think stereotypical 1950s American culture where the dad went out to, you know, work and then the mom was at home and, you know, the mom took care of kids and the dad was responsible for this or that. It doesn't really work out exactly like that here. There's also a lot of single moms that are working really hard to make it all happen for their kids as well. But I think that in relationships, when people are together, gender roles are a lot more traditional here in the Philippines compared to how they are in the US. And really there's a lot of debate. You know, if you just search on YouTube for passport bros and you look at, you know, criticisms of women in Western countries against Filipinas, you know, I think that there's really a little bit of a culture war going on there where Western women will feel like, what's going on with these Filipinas? They're a bit more conservative, you know, everybody should be equal, and everybody is seen as equal over here. But I think how gender roles are here is really going back to a previous time in the US. And a lot of Western guys are finding their way over to the Philippines for this reason. You know, I think that they're just finding that they're wanting to go back to a time where gender roles were more straightforward, more simple. And of course, those of you watching are going to have very strongly different opinions about things like that. But the reality is gender roles here in the Philippines compared to the US is a whole lot different. Somewhat related to this, I find that another thing that really surprised me about America compared to the Philippines was sexual orientation. In the US, I think that people feel like we've really evolved and everybody's accepted regardless of sexual orientation, but I don't know. I feel like we kind of do that in a way that is often a bit disingenuous. We'll analyze these things. We'll want to kind of like check off the right boxes about these things. Like, of course, I'm not, you know, going to discriminate against somebody based on their sexual orientation, and we'll document all of this in HR policies for workplaces. But at the end of the day, if you're truly accepting of things like this, there wouldn't need to be all of those laws and politically correct things that you say or don't say and all this debate in society. You would just simply accept one another. And that's what I really find here in the Philippines, that whether you are gay or straight, whether you are a ladyboy, whatever it is, anything over here just kind of goes. And I'm not saying that's for everybody. Of course, there's a conservative element of culture that struggles with some of these things, but overwhelmingly, you know, apart from just knowing a couple of, you know, friends over here that were gay, whose elder family struggles a bit with them, I just really find that people over here don't think twice about these things. It's not that they say that they're a good thing or a bad thing. They just are. People just accept each other in the same way that heterosexual people in the US just accept other heterosexual people. It's the same over here, where heterosexual people, gay people, whatever the case may be, it's just kind of good to go. There's not a lot of they, them, she, he, all of this kind of stuff. A little bit of it. People just accept people for being people, even if they come from different perspectives and backgrounds. Another huge difference that really impacts me personally that I didn't expect here in the Philippines, quite different than the US, is work. So in the US, work is king and queen. Work just comes first and second and third, and other things like a life or a family or leisure time or sleep, anything like that tends to come a very distant place from work. People really take work very seriously, which is a good thing, but often quite out of balance. What I find here in the Philippines is that work doesn't come first. Family comes first. Taking a good nap sometimes comes first. Your mental well-being comes first. There's a lot of other things that I see people putting first over here, and work doesn't rank as number one. There are definitely some workaholic people over here, but for the most part, people really truly are gonna put family first, and I find that there's just different priorities with things. Now, some of these things, as an American, as a business owner, are a little tough to swallow over here, especially when you're a business owner and you got deadlines, you got client expectations, you got to get stuff done. When people put other things first, that kind of gets in the way of that, right? So this is really the type of thing that as an American coming from that culture, I also value some other things. However, seeing the difference here is just really a breath of fresh air as well. Seeing how people could live life in a different way, where work isn't the first, second, third, and 10th priority, but there's more of a balance between other things that are important. So, is one better than the other? Depends how you look at these things. Sometimes it depends whether you're a business owner or an employee, but for me, without a doubt, work culture here is extremely different in the Philippines compared to the US. Another enormous difference between the US and the Philippines is how people deal with challenges, with difficulties, with struggles that come up inevitably no matter where you live in the world. I find that Americans deal with these things far worse than Filipinos do. Often they'll go through the same struggles. There's different types of struggles as well. Those just look different based on, different circumstances in different cultures. But I find that Americans get super stressed out, a lot of anxiety, depressed, really just not coping, taking out their anger and frustration and, things like that on people when they're going through challenges in life. And conversely, Filipinos who also may be dealing with enormous pressures and challenges and difficulties will kind of deal with things like, well, it's another day. This is what we should be happy for. Let me lean on my family. Let me talk to my friends. Let me watch a little Facebook and forget all the difficulties in the world. I find that while Americans are just complaining about stuff, Filipinos are just so much more calmly dealing with difficulties. Now, do people have depression here? Do they have fears here? Do they have anxieties here? Of course they do. But I just find that they deal with all of those things internally in a way that is so much healthier, so much stronger, so much more resilient than Americans tend to do. I've really lived through things here like, the pandemic, like a terrible typhoon that really was just the scariest night of my life. No water, no electricity, no internet. I mean, that's worse. Like, sure, I could live with no water, no electricity, but I can't live without internet. But Filipinos in those circumstances just were really incredible how well they dealt with those type of struggles in life. So, there's so many more things I could talk about, but I would love to hear from you guys. If you know people here in the Philippines, if you lived here, what are some of the differences that you see between American or Western or wherever the heck you may be culture and the Philippines? I would love to get your thoughts. And as always, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Take care.